The message arrived on a Tuesday morning, crackling through every communication array from Mars to the outer colonies. Dr. Sarah Chen nearly dropped her coffee when the translation software finished processing the alien transmission. The beings called themselves the Kethvar, and they were dying. Please, anyone who receives this message, the translated text read, "We are a peaceful species facing extinction. Our worlds are being consumed by an ancient evil that devours everything in its path. We have tried to fight, but we are not warriors. We are farmers, artists, philosophers. We beg any civilization capable of war to help us. We offer all our knowledge, our technology, our very souls in exchange for salvation." The message included coordinates to their home system, detailed scans of the threat they faced, and something that made Sarah's blood run cold. Biological data showing the Kethvar were herbivorous, with no natural weapons, no aggressive instincts, and physical frames so delicate that Earth's gravity would crush them. Within hours, the message had reached every human settlement across known space. The response was immediate and unanimous. Humanity would answer. Admiral Marcus Kane stood before the assembled fleet commanders in the war room aboard the flagship Retribution. The massive holographic display showed the Kethvar system, now under siege by creatures the aliens called the Devourers, a parasitic species that consumed entire biospheres. "Gentlemen and ladies," Kane's gravelly voice filled the chamber, "we've received our first distress call from an alien civilization. They're pacifists being slaughtered by monsters. The politicians are still debating whether we should intervene." A younger commander raised her hand. "Sir, with respect, shouldn't we wait for official orders?" Kane's weathered face cracked into a grim smile. "Commander Torres, in my 40 years of service, I've learned something about humanity. We don't wait for permission to do what's right. The fleet is already mobilizing. Every ship, every Marine, every pilot who can hold a weapon is volunteering for this mission." The hologram shifted, showing the size of the approaching human armada. 700 warships, from massive dreadnoughts to swift destroyers, 50,000 Marines in powered armor, 1,000 fighter craft. It was the largest military force humanity had ever assembled, and they were taking it to a star system they'd never seen to fight for aliens they'd never met. "The Kethvar sent us their complete technological database as payment," Kane continued. "Their energy shields, their faster-than-light communications, their medical technology. It's centuries ahead of ours. But you know what they don't have? Weapons. Not a single blueprint for anything more dangerous than a farming tool." The room fell silent as the implications sank in. These beings had reached the stars without ever learning to make war. "Sir," another commander spoke up, "the long-range scouts report the Devourer fleet is massive. Easily 10,000 ships, all organic, all hungry. Our intelligence suggests they've already consumed 4 Kethvar worlds." Kane nodded grimly. "Then we'll have to hit them hard and fast. The Kethvar have agreed to evacuate their remaining populations to designated safe zones. Our job is to buy them time and eliminate the threat." As the briefing continued, reports flooded in from across human space. Civilian corporations were contributing supplies. Retired veterans were coming out of retirement. Even the normally isolationist colonies on the rim were sending ships. The message had touched something deep in the human psyche, the instinct to protect the innocent. Dr. Chen found herself aboard the science vessel Prometheus, racing toward the Kethvar system alongside the main fleet. She'd volunteered to serve as the primary xenobiologist and translator. The irony wasn't lost on her that humanity's first contact with alien intelligence was happening during wartime. The ship's AI chimed softly. "Doctor, we're receiving a direct transmission from the Kethvar homeworld." The main screen flickered to life, revealing a creature that looked like a cross between a praying mantis and a flower. Its movements were graceful, almost dance-like, and its large compound eyes reflected a deep intelligence. When it spoke, its voice was melodic, like wind chimes. "I am HFY, speaker for the Kethvar Council. We cannot believe you came. When we sent our message, we had little hope. Most species ignore distress calls from unknown civilizations." Sarah leaned forward. "HFY, humanity doesn't abandon those in need. We've studied your data on the Devourers. We understand the threat you're facing." The alien's antennae trembled. "You must understand we have never harmed another living being. The concept of killing is foreign to us. Even in self-defense, we struggle to act. When the Devourers first arrived, many of our people simply couldn't comprehend that such evil existed. That's why we're here," Sarah replied. Humanity has learned to fight because we've faced our own monsters. We understand evil and we know how to stop it. HFY's compound eyes seem to shimmer. We have watched your species through our long-range observations since receiving your reply. You are warriors, but not cruel ones. You fight to protect, not to conquer. This gives us hope. The transmission cut as proximity alarms began blaring throughout the fleet. They had arrived at the edge of the HFY system, and the sight that greeted them was horrifying. 3 planets that should have been green and vibrant were now gray, lifeless husks. Massive organic ships, black as space itself, swarmed around the remaining inhabited worlds like locusts. Admiral Kane's voice echoed across all channels. All ships. This is Admiral Kane. We've seen what these creatures do to peaceful worlds. We've seen what they did to innocents who couldn't fight back. Today they're going to learn what happens when they threaten someone under humanity's protection. The human fleet spread out in attack formation, their weapons powering up. For the first time in galactic history, Earth's children were going to war not for territory or resources, but for the simple principle that some things were worth fighting for. As the first shots were fired, Sarah watched the tactical display with grim satisfaction. Humanity had finally found its place in the cosmic community, as the guardians who answered when the helpless called for aid. The age of human isolation was over, and the galaxy would never be the same. The first salvo of human railgun fire tore through space like silver lightning. Each projectile, accelerated to 30% the speed of light, struck the Devourer vessels with the force of small nuclear weapons. The organic ships writhed and screamed, actually screamed. Their bioacoustic wails transmitted across multiple frequencies. Captain Elena Vasquez gripped the arms of her command chair aboard the destroyer Indomitable as the first wave of enemy fighters approached. The creatures were beautiful in their horror, living ships that pulsed with bioluminescent veins, their surfaces rippling like muscle tissue. Weapons, target the larger clusters, she ordered. Don't let them coordinate their attacks. The point defense systems came alive, filling the void with streams of superheated plasma. Where human weapons met Devourer flesh, explosions bloomed like deadly flowers. But for every enemy destroyed, 2 more seemed to take its place. Captain, they're adapting to our weapons. Lieutenant Rodriguez called from his station. The smaller ships are developing some kind of ablative armor. This was what Admiral Kane had warned them about. Intelligence suggested the Devourers were not just parasites. They were evolutionary perfectionists, capable of rapid biological adaptation. What killed them once might not work twice. On the bridge of the Retribution, Admiral Kane watched the battle unfold with cold calculation. The human fleet was performing admirably, but the enemy numbers were staggering. For every Devourer ship destroyed, their scanners detected dozens more emerging from the consumed planets below. Sir, the HFY delegation is requesting permission to communicate, his communications officer reported. Kane nodded. Put them through. The melodic voice of HFY filled the bridge, but now it carried notes of desperate hope. Admiral Kane, we are witnessing something unprecedented. Never in our observations of the Devourers have we seen them sustain such losses. They are confused. They do not understand your species' willingness to die for strangers. HFY, we need intelligence on their command structure, Kane replied while watching another squadron of fighters engage the enemy. How do they coordinate their attacks? They operate through biological networks like a hive mind, but with multiple nodes. We believe the largest ships serve as command vessels. However, Admiral, there is something else you must know. The Devourers are not just destroying our worlds, they are studying them, learning from them. Each species they consume adds to their collective knowledge. Kane's expression darkened. What are you telling us? They have consumed 17 different spacefaring civilizations. Each one has made them stronger, more adaptable. We fear they may have been waiting for a warrior species like yours. Before Kane could respond, alarms began blaring. The tactical display showed something that made his blood freeze. A massive Devourer bioship, easily 10 times the size of his flagship, emerging from behind the 3rd planet. Its surface crawled with weapons that looked disturbingly familiar. Those are Viraki fusion cannons, HFY whispered over the comm. The Viraki were a warrior species the Devourers consumed 2 cycles ago. And those are Thornian acid projectors, another fallen civilization. The implications hit Kane like a physical blow. The Devourers didn't just consume. They absorbed the military knowledge of every species they destroyed. They were facing an enemy that combined the weapons technology of nearly 20 different civilizations. All ships, evasive maneuvers, Kane barked. Don't let that thing get a firing solution. But it was too late. The hybrid weapon systems on the massive bioship fired simultaneously. Fusion beams, plasma lances, gravity bombs, and weapons humanity had never seen before reached out across space. The destroyer Defiant simply vanished, vaporized by a weapon that turned matter into pure energy. The cruiser Mumbai was caught by a gravity bomb that compressed it into a sphere the size of a basketball. We're losing ships too fast, Kane's tactical officer reported. That command vessel is coordinating their entire fleet. They're using strategies from multiple species simultaneously. Kane stared at the tactical display, his mind racing. Traditional tactics weren't going to work against an enemy that had learned from the military doctrines of 20 civilizations. But there was something the Devourers hadn't accounted for. Communications, patch me through to all ships, Kane ordered. All vessels, this is Admiral Kane. The enemy has the weapons and tactics of 20 species, but they're missing one crucial element, he paused, watching as human fighters danced between enemy formations with reckless bravery that should have been suicidal. They've never fought humans before. They don't understand what makes us different. All ships implement Protocol 7. Protocol 7 was something no other species had ever attempted, a complete abandonment of traditional military doctrine in favor of pure, chaotic aggression. It was a strategy that could only work with crews willing to ignore their survival instincts entirely. The human fleet suddenly broke formation, individual ships charging directly at the massive command vessel, with no coordination whatsoever. Destroyers rammed into enemy cruisers. Fighter pilots flew directly into enemy weapon ports before ejecting. Marines in powered armor launched themselves from airlocks to board enemy vessels with nothing but personal weapons. On the bioship, the Devourer collective mind reeled in confusion. Every tactical algorithm they had absorbed from conquered civilizations suggested the humans were committing suicide. No rational species would sacrifice themselves so freely for so little tactical advantage. But the chaos was working. Human ships were getting through defenses designed to stop coordinated attacks. The randomness of their assault made it impossible for the bioship to predict and counter their movements. Commander Sarah Park ejected from her crippled fighter directly onto the hull of a Devourer cruiser. Her suit's magnetic boots held her to the organic surface as she activated her plasma torch and began cutting through the ship's hide. Around her, dozens of other Marines were doing the same thing, turning themselves into human missiles. This is insane, Park shouted over the comm as acidic blood sprayed from the wound she was cutting. We're actually boarding ships in the middle of a space battle. That's what makes it work, replied Sergeant Chen as he fired his assault rifle directly into what looked like a nerve cluster. They can't plan for crazy. Back on the Retribution, Kane watched with grim satisfaction as human tactics began to tell. The Devourers were adapting, but adaptation took time and chaos was by definition unpredictable. The massive command vessel was taking damage from multiple boarding parties, its coordination abilities beginning to falter. Sir, we're receiving a transmission from the Kethvar planet, his communications officer reported. They're saying something about the Devourers exhibiting unprecedented behavior patterns. Kane allowed himself a small smile. Put HFY through. Admiral Kane. The alien's voice carried a note of wonder. The Devourers are doing something we have never observed. They are retreating. Not just tactically, but actually fleeing. We believe your species has introduced a variable they cannot compute. Kane nodded, watching as several smaller Devourer ships actually broke off from the battle entirely. HFY, I need you to understand something about humanity. We don't fight like other species because we're not like other species. We're the only ones crazy enough to ram a battleship with a fighter craft, or board an enemy vessel with nothing but small arms. The battle was far from over. But for the first time since arriving in the system, Kane felt they might actually win. The Devourers had expected to face another rational, predictable species. Instead, they had encountered humanity's greatest strength, the willingness to do whatever it took, no matter how insane it seemed, to protect those who couldn't protect themselves. The boarding of the Devourer command vessel was unlike anything in military history. Sergeant Maria Santos found herself crawling through what could only be described as living corridors, the walls pulsing with alien circulatory systems. The air was thick and humid, filled with spores that made her filtration system work overtime. "This place is more like the inside of a body than a ship," she muttered into her comm, following the bioluminescent trail left by the advance team. Behind her, 12 Marines moved through the organic labyrinth, their weapons charged and ready. The Devourers themselves were worse than the intelligence briefings had suggested. When the first one appeared around a corner, Santos nearly froze. It looked like a nightmare fusion of spider, lamprey, and something that had never evolved on any rational world. Multiple eyes tracked her movement while acid dripped from circular rows of teeth. "Contact!" she shouted, opening fire with her plasma rifle. The creature absorbed the first 3 shots, its flesh rippling and adapting before her eyes. By the 4th shot, it had developed a reflective carapace that deflected the plasma back at her team. "They're learning from our weapons in real time," Private Jackson yelled, diving for cover behind what looked like a nerve cluster. Santos switched to kinetic rounds, the old-fashioned bullets tearing through the creature before it could adapt. But even as it died, she could see other Devourers in the distance, their flesh already changing to counter-kinetic weapons. This was the horror the Kethvar had faced, an enemy that learned from every encounter, that grew stronger with each defeat. No wonder the peaceful aliens had been helpless. Meanwhile, in the ship's control center, Lieutenant Commander James Wright had discovered something that changed everything. The bioship's nervous system was laid bare before him, a vast network of neural pathways that pulsed with alien thought. But it wasn't just one mind. It was dozens, maybe hundreds of absorbed consciousness from conquered species. "My God," he whispered, studying the readouts on his scanner. "They don't just take the technology. They take the minds." His communications specialist, Corporal Lisa Park, looked over his shoulder at the display. "Sir, are you saying those are actual alien brains wired into this ship?" Wright nodded grimly. "Every species they've conquered, every civilization they've destroyed. The survivors are trapped in here, forced to serve as living computers. This isn't just genocide. It's slavery on a cosmic scale." The revelation spread through the human forces like wildfire. What had started as a rescue mission became something far more personal. They weren't just fighting monsters. They were fighting slavers who had imprisoned the minds of entire civilizations. Back in space, Admiral Kane coordinated the assault on the massive command vessel while keeping one eye on the broader battle. The human fleet was taking heavy losses, but their unconventional tactics continued to confound the Devourers. Ships that should have been destroyed kept fighting with skeleton crews. Fighters with no weapons left were ramming enemy vessels. Marines without ammunition were using their armor as weapons. "Admiral, we're receiving some kind of signal from inside the bioship," his communications officer reported. "It's not from our boarding teams," Kane frowned. "Put it through." What came through the speakers wasn't human, but it wasn't Devourer either. It was a mixture of voices, dozens of different species all speaking at once, but the translation software managed to process it. "Human warriors. We are the enslaved minds of the conquered. For generations we have been forced to serve our destroyers, to use our knowledge to help them consume more worlds. We have watched helplessly as our homeworlds died. But now we see hope." Kane felt a chill run down his spine. "Who are you?" "We are Veriki warriors whose fusion cannons you now face. We are Thornian strategists whose battle plans guide our captors. We are Zenthtar philosophers whose wisdom has been perverted to serve destruction. We are 17 species who thought we were gone forever." The voices continued, growing stronger. "Your warriors inside this vessel have shown us something we had forgotten, that some fights are worth any sacrifice. We have been analyzing your species since the battle began. You fight not for conquest but for protection. You die not for glory but for strangers you have never met." Kane found his voice. "Can you help us?" "We can do more than that, Admiral Kane. We can give you what you need to not just defeat the Devourers but to free every enslaved mind in their fleet. But the cost? The cost will be the complete destruction of this vessel and every consciousness within it." The implication hit Kane like a physical blow. The enslaved minds were offering to commit suicide to help humanity win the battle. "There has to be another way," Kane said. "We don't abandon allies." "Admiral," the voices replied. And now there was something like laughter in the transmission. "You still do not understand what makes your species unique. Every other race we have encountered, when faced with impossible odds, seeks survival above all else. You seek victory regardless of cost. That is why we trust you with this choice. Before Kane could respond, his tactical officer shouted a warning. "Admiral, massive energy buildup detected on the bioship. It's preparing some kind of superweapon." On the screens, they could see the command vessel's organic hull opening like a flower, revealing a weapon that defied description. Energy patterns suggested it could destroy not just their fleet, but the entire Kethvar system. "Admiral," the enslaved voices spoke urgently. "The Devourers have decided that if they cannot have this system, no one can. They will sterilize everything rather than face defeat. We can stop them, but only if you trust us." Kane looked at his bridge crew, seeing the same grim determination in their eyes that had carried humanity through every crisis in their history. They had come here to save the Kethvar. They would not fail now. "Do it," Kane ordered. The change was immediate. Throughout the bioship, enslaved minds that had been forced to serve destruction for generations suddenly turned against their captors. 17 species worth of scientific knowledge, military expertise, and technological innovation turned toward a single goal: stopping the Devourers permanently. The boarding teams found themselves suddenly aided by the ship itself. Corridors opened to provide clear paths to vital systems. Defensive organisms stood down or even turned on their handlers. Navigation systems began routing power away from weapons and toward critical areas where human demolition charges could do maximum damage. Sergeant Santos found herself face to face with a dying Viraki. Consciousness, its alien thoughts somehow translated directly into her mind. "Human warrior," the voice whispered. "Take our weapons technology. Learn our military tactics, but remember us not as slaves, but as those who chose freedom in the end." Similar scenes played out throughout the bioship as 17 species said goodbye to existence, choosing to die free rather than live as tools of destruction. As the enslaved minds initiated their final act of rebellion, Admiral Kane ordered all human forces to withdraw from the bioship. The massive vessel began to convulse, its organic systems turning against themselves in a cascade of self-destruction that would ripple through the entire Devourer fleet. The age of the Devourers was ending, brought down not by superior firepower or advanced tactics, but by something they had never encountered: the willingness of both humans and their former victims to sacrifice everything for the freedom of others. But the battle was far from over, and the greatest test of human resolve was yet to come. The death of the command vessel sent shockwaves through the Devourer fleet that were both literal and metaphysical. As the massive bioship tore itself apart from within, its destruction severed neural links to thousands of smaller vessels, leaving them confused and directionless. But the victory came at a terrible cost. The 17 species that had chosen freedom and death were gone forever, their sacrifice echoing across space in frequencies only the most sensitive equipment could detect. Dr. Sarah Chen aboard the Prometheus watched the readings with tears streaming down her face. "The psychic resonance is incredible," she whispered to her research team. "Those minds didn't just die, they burned themselves out completely to break the neural networks controlling the entire fleet." But even as smaller, Devourer vessels drifted aimlessly or began consuming each other in confusion. New contacts appeared on the edge of the system. Admiral Kane felt his heart sink as the sensors revealed the approaching force. 3 more fleets, each larger than the one they had just fought. "Sir, long-range scans indicate these new arrivals are different," his sensor operator reported. "The biosignatures don't match the vessels we've been fighting. These appear to be older. Much older." Kane studied the tactical display with growing dread. The new ships moved with a coordinated precision that the previous fleet had lacked. Where the original Devourers had been chaotic and adaptive, these vessels moved like clockwork, their formations perfect and unchanging. Sci-Fi's voice crackled over the communication system, filled with a terror that chilled the bridge. "Admiral Kane, those are the first Devourers. The original strain, unchanged since they first began their conquest of the galaxy. They are the progenitors, the source from which all other Devourers spring." "How are they different from what we just fought?" Kane demanded. "The others were corrupted by the species they consumed, made stronger but also less focused. These are pure predators. They do not adapt because they do not need to. They do not learn because they have already perfected the art of consumption. Admiral, we estimate they are over 10,000 years old." The implications were staggering. Where the previous fleet had been chaotic and adaptive, these ancient Devourers had spent millennia perfecting their methods. They didn't need to steal technology or absorb minds. They had evolved beyond such crude methods. As the first devourers entered the system, something unprecedented happened. The scattered remnants of the original fleet stopped fighting each other and began moving toward the newcomers. But instead of joining them, the younger devourers were being consumed by their ancestors. They're cannibalizing their own evolution, Dr. Chen gasped, watching the readings. The first devourers are absorbing all the adaptations and knowledge their descendants acquired, but filtering out anything that weakens their core purpose. Kane watched in horror as the ancient fleet literally ate the scattered remains of their descendants, growing larger and more organized with each consumption. Within hours, what had been 3 separate fleets became one massive armada, powered by millennia of experience and the stolen knowledge of 23 civilizations. All ships, fall back to defensive positions around the Kethvar homeworld, Kane ordered. We're not running, but we need time to regroup. But the first devourers had no intention of allowing them to retreat. The ancient fleet moved with terrifying efficiency, cutting off escape routes and herding the human vessels toward the inhabited planet below. It was clear they intended to consume everything in the system, Kethvar, humans, and anything else unlucky enough to be present. Lieutenant Commander Wright, who had barely escaped the previous bioship, found himself aboard the heavy cruiser Titan's Fist. The ship's captain, Elena Rodriguez, was a veteran of the Mars colonial wars and had seen more than her share of impossible situations. Commander, you've been inside one of their ships, Rodriguez said as they watched the ancient fleet approach. What did you learn that might help us? Wright studied the sensor readings, comparing them to his memories of the bioship's interior. Captain, the previous generation was chaotic because they were still evolving, still adapting. But these first devourers, they're not just ships. They're entire ecosystems. Each vessel is a perfect predatory organism that's had 10,000 years to eliminate every weakness. So what you're telling me is we're facing an enemy with 10,000 years of combat experience, perfect biological design, and the absorbed knowledge of over 20 civilizations? Wright nodded grimly. That's exactly what I'm telling you, Captain. Rodriguez was quiet for a moment, then activated the ship's intercom. All hands, this is Captain Rodriguez. The enemy we're about to face is older than human civilization. They've conquered more worlds than we have cities. By every rational measure, we should surrender or flee. She paused, looking out at the approaching armada. But we're not rational, are we? We're human, and humans have a long tradition of doing impossible things for people we've never met. Today, we're going to add another chapter to that tradition. Across the fleet, similar speeches were being given. Captain Yamamoto of the destroyer Bushido told his crew about samurai who faced impossible odds. Commander Al-Rashid of the cruiser Desert Storm spoke of ancient warriors who fought to the last man to protect their tribes. Captain O'Brien of the battleship Celtic Pride invoked the memory of soldiers who had charged machine gun nests with nothing but courage, but it was Admiral Kane who gave the speech that would be remembered by history. Broadcasting to every human vessel in the system, his words carried the weight of his species' destiny. Every person in this fleet volunteered for this mission. Not for money, not for glory, not because they were ordered to, but because it was right. The Kethvar sent out a call for help and humanity answered. Now we're facing an enemy that logic says we cannot defeat. Kane paused, looking at the tactical display showing the approaching ancient fleet. But logic has never been humanity's strong suit. We're the species that looked at fire and decided to tame it. We looked at the ocean and decided to cross it. We looked at the sky and decided to fly. Today we look at an impossible enemy and decide to fight it. His voice grew stronger. The first devourers have spent 10,000 years perfecting the art of destruction. But they've never faced something we've spent our entire evolutionary history perfecting, the art of protecting those who cannot protect themselves. They may have 10,000 years of experience, but we have something they've never encountered. The ancient fleet was now within weapons range, their bioships opening like flowers of death, revealing weapon systems that defied human understanding. We have love, Kane concluded. Love for strangers we've never met. Love for a species that has never harmed anyone. Love for the idea that in a universe full of predators, someone has to stand up for the innocent. Today, that someone is us. As the first shots were exchanged between humanity and the ancient enemy, something unprecedented began to happen. The Kethvar, despite their pacifist nature, began to move. Not to fight, they were incapable of that, but to help in the only way they could. Their ships, originally designed for scientific exploration and peaceful travel, began positioning themselves as shields between the human fleet and the enemy. HFY's voice came over the comm, filled with quiet determination. Admiral Kane, we cannot fight, but we can give our lives meaning by ensuring that those who fight for us have every chance of victory. We will not let our protectors face this evil alone. The ancient devourers, for the first time in 10,000 years, encountered something they had never seen before. Two species working together not out of military alliance or mutual benefit, but out of pure compassion and gratitude. It was a variable their perfect predatory minds had never computed, and it would prove to be their undoing. The battle against the first devourers began with a display of power that dwarfed everything humanity had previously witnessed. The ancient bioships unleashed weapons that seemed to bend reality itself, gravity wells that crushed vessels into singularities, energy beams that existed in multiple dimensions simultaneously, and viral attacks that corrupted both electronic systems and human neural patterns. Captain Elena Rodriguez watched her tactical display with growing despair as the heavy cruiser, Valiant, simply ceased to exist, erased from reality by a weapon that left no debris, no energy signature, nothing but empty space where 1,000 souls had been fighting moments before. Captain, we're detecting some kind of temporal distortion around the lead bioship, her science officer reported. It's aging our missiles in flight. They're turning to dust before they reach the target. Rodriguez gritted her teeth. Switch to kinetic rounds. Old-fashioned tungsten slugs. Let's see them age solid metal. But even as her ship's railguns fired, the projectiles slowed and stopped mid-flight, suspended in bubbles of distorted space-time. The first devourers weren't just using advanced technology. They were manipulating the fundamental forces of physics itself. Aboard the flagship Retribution, Admiral Kane received casualty reports that made his blood freeze. In the first 30 minutes of combat, they had lost over 100 ships. The ancient enemy was systematically dismantling the human fleet with weapons that shouldn't have been possible. Sir, we're receiving a transmission from Dr. Chen on the Prometheus, his communications officer reported. She says she's discovered something important. Kane's personal screen flickered to life, showing Dr. Chen in her laboratory, surrounded by complex readings and alien artifact fragments she'd collected during the previous battle. Admiral, I've been analyzing the neural networks we encountered in the bioships, Chen said rapidly. The first devourers aren't just old, they're quantum entangled with something massive. Every ship in their fleet shares a single consciousness, but the source isn't here in this system. Kane frowned. What are you saying, Doctor? I'm saying these aren't the real first devourers. These are projections, quantum shadows of something much larger hiding in subspace. The actual entity is using these ships as sensory organs, experiencing our reality through quantum tunneling. The implications hit Kane like a physical blow. They weren't fighting an ancient fleet. They were fighting the fingers of some cosmic horror that existed partially outside normal spacetime. Doctor, how do we fight something that exists in multiple dimensions? Chen's eyes lit up with desperate inspiration. We can't fight it directly, but we can sever its connection to our reality. The quantum entanglement requires specific resonance frequencies. If we can disrupt those frequencies, the projections collapse, Kane finished. What do you need? Every ship in the fleet needs to reconfigure their sensor arrays to broadcast on the same frequency. It'll create a quantum interference pattern that should sever the connection. But Admiral, there's a problem. Kane waited, already knowing he wouldn't like what came next. The frequency we need to broadcast is the same frequency human neural tissue uses for consciousness. Every person in the fleet will essentially be using their own brain as a transmitter. The feedback could be fatal. Kane closed his eyes for a moment, feeling the weight of command settle on his shoulders like lead. Around him, his bridge crew waited for orders, while enemy weapons continued to tear through their fleet. How long would we need to maintain the broadcast? Best estimate, 90 seconds for complete quantum decoherence. But Admiral, the neural feedback will start causing permanent brain damage after about 60 seconds. Kane opened his eyes and looked at his bridge crew. These people had followed him across the galaxy to fight for strangers. They deserved to know what he was asking of them. All ships, this is Admiral Kane, he broadcast across the fleet. Dr. Chen has discovered a way to defeat the enemy. But it requires every human in the fleet to risk their lives in a way we've never asked before. We need to use our own neural patterns as weapons. knowing that it will likely kill or permanently damage most of us. He paused, watching the tactical display as another destroyer was consumed by impossible energies. I won't order this. I can't order this. But I'm asking for volunteers. Anyone willing to risk everything for people we've never met? Configure your sensors for neural broadcasting on my mark. The response was immediate and unanimous. Every single ship in the fleet began reconfiguring their systems. Not a single captain hesitated. Not a single crew member objected. When humanity had decided to answer the Kethvar distress call, they had already chosen to risk everything. But it was HFY who provided the final piece of the puzzle. The Kethvar speaker's voice came across all channels, filled with desperate determination. Human warriors, we cannot fight, but we can think. Our neural patterns are different from yours. We can boost your broadcast without suffering the same damage. Every Kethvar ship will link their consciousness to yours. We will be your amplifiers. Dr. Chen gasped as she saw the readings. Admiral, with Kethvar neural amplification, we might be able to complete the quantum disruption in 30 seconds instead of 90. The brain damage would be minimal. Kane felt something he hadn't experienced since the battle began. Hope. All ships prepare for quantum broadcasting. Kethvar vessels were honored to fight alongside you. What happened next would be studied by xenobiologists and quantum physicists for generations. 700 human ships and 300 Kethvar vessels linked their consciousness into a single, unified broadcast. The joining of two completely different forms of intelligence created something unprecedented, a hybrid thought pattern that existed simultaneously in multiple quantum states. The first devourers, experiencing reality through their quantum projections, suddenly found themselves facing something their 10,000-year-old minds couldn't process. The combined human Kethvar consciousness wasn't just broadcasting on their quantum frequency. It was thinking at them, projecting emotions and concepts that no purely predatory intelligence could understand. For the first time in their existence, the ancient devourers experienced doubt. They felt the human emotions of love, sacrifice, and protection for strangers. They experienced the Kethvar concepts of harmony, growth without consumption, and joy in the existence of others. These ideas were poison to minds that had spent millennia perfecting pure predation. The quantum connection began to destabilize as the hybrid consciousness flooded their network with incompatible thoughts. Ancient bioships started convulsing as their quantum shadows lost coherence. Weapons that manipulated space-time itself began firing randomly as the controlling intelligence lost focus. Captain Rodriguez watched in amazement as the enemy fleet began tearing itself apart. What's happening to them? Dr. Chen, her voice strained from the neural connection, managed to explain. They can't process our emotions. Love, sacrifice, protecting others, these concepts are breaking their quantum coherence. They're literally thinking themselves to death. But the broadcast was taking its toll on the human crews as well. Across the fleet, people began collapsing as the neural feedback pushed their brains beyond safe limits. Kane felt blood trickling from his nose as the connection strained his consciousness to its breaking point. 15 more seconds, Chen gasped. We just need 15 more seconds. That's when the youngest member of the bridge crew, Ensign David Park, spoke up through gritted teeth. Sir, permission to increase neural output. I can boost the signal by channeling more of my consciousness into the broadcast. Kane saw what the young man was suggesting, essentially burning out his own mind to strengthen the connection. Ensign, that could leave you brain dead. Park smiled through the pain. Admiral, we came here to save the Kethvar. If my mind is the price for their freedom, then that's a bargain. Before Kane could stop him, Park had diverted all his neural output into the broadcast. The effect was immediate. The quantum interference pattern spiked in intensity, and across space, the first devourer projections began dissolving like nightmares exposed to light. But Park wasn't alone. Throughout the fleet, crew members were making the same choice, volunteering to burn out their own minds to strengthen the collective broadcast. Engineers, pilots, marines, scientists, hundreds of humans chose to sacrifice their consciousness for the freedom of aliens they'd never met. The ancient intelligence, faced with a level of selfless sacrifice it couldn't comprehend, finally broke. The quantum connection shattered completely, and the bioships collapsed into normal matter, their impossible weapons failing as the mind controlling them retreated into the deepest layers of subspace. As the last enemy vessel fell silent, Kane surveyed the cost of victory. They had saved the Kethvar and banished an ancient evil from the galaxy, but nearly 300 humans had voluntarily destroyed their own minds in the process, leaving them alive but forever changed, their personalities scattered across quantum space. The battle was won, but the true test of humanity's character was just beginning. The aftermath of the quantum broadcast left the human fleet drifting in space, many ships operating on skeleton crews as hundreds of personnel lay unconscious in medical bays. The volunteers who had burned out their minds to strengthen the broadcast were alive, but changed. Their personalities fragmented across quantum dimensions in ways that no human doctor understood. Dr. Sarah Chen worked frantically in the Prometheus medical bay, trying to understand what had happened to the affected crew members. Ensign Park lay on a biobed, his body healthy but his mind scattered across multiple quantum states. When he spoke, it was in fragments of different languages, including some that seemed to belong to the enslaved species they had freed from the previous bioship. "Doctor, this is unprecedented," her medical assistant reported. "The neural scans show their consciousness isn't gone, it's distributed. They're somehow existing in multiple quantum realities simultaneously." Chen studied the readings with growing wonder and horror. They sacrificed their individual consciousness but gained something else. They're connected to the quantum matrix that the Devourers used. They can perceive realities we can't even imagine. But it was HFY who provided the most shocking revelation. The Keith of her speaker materialized on the screen, his compound eyes reflecting deep concern and something that might have been awe. "Dr. Chen, we must speak privately. What your people have done, it is beyond our understanding. The volunteers who sacrificed their consciousness, they have not lost their minds. They have transcended individual thought entirely." Chen frowned. "What do you mean?" "In our galaxy's history, we have encountered only one other species that achieved voluntary quantum consciousness distribution. They became something beyond individual life, beyond even death as we understand it. Your people may have accidentally achieved evolutionary ascension. The implications were staggering. The humans who had sacrificed themselves might not be damaged. They might be the next step in human evolution, existing as pure consciousness across multiple dimensional layers. Meanwhile, Admiral Kane was dealing with a more immediate crisis. The battle was won, but the human fleet was scattered and badly damaged. Worse, they were receiving reports of more Devourer fleets approaching from other sectors of the galaxy, drawn by the quantum disturbances of the battle. "Sir, long-range sensors detect at least 12 more fleets converging on our position," his sensor operator reported. "They'll arrive within 48 hours. Kane studied the tactical display with grim determination. The surviving human forces couldn't fight another battle like the one they'd just endured. They had perhaps 200 operational ships left, and many of those were running on minimal crews. But then something extraordinary happened. The quantum-distributed humans began to communicate, not through normal speech but through direct consciousness transmission. Ensign Park, his mind spread across multiple realities, spoke in perfect unison with dozens of other affected crew members. "Admiral Kane," they said, their voices harmonizing in ways that shouldn't have been possible. "We can see them coming. All of them. The remaining Devourer fleets, the ancient ones hiding in subspace, the source intelligence that commands them all. We can see the entire network." Kane approached Park's medical bed carefully. "Ensign, is that really you?" "We are David Park and Maria Santos and Chen Wei and Sarah O'Brien and hundreds of others," the collective voice replied. "We are also fragments of the 17 species that died to free us from the bioship. We are the echo of every consciousness that touched the quantum network. We are more than we were, and we are still human." The distributed consciousness continued. "The Devourers are not what they appear to be, Admiral. They are not the source of the threat. They are antibodies." Kane felt his blood freeze. Antibodies? What are they fighting? Something that consumed their creators eons ago. The Devourers were created as a last desperate measure by a dying civilization to contain a cosmic parasite that feeds on consciousness itself. For millions of years they have been fighting a holding action, consuming civilizations to prevent something worse from breaking free. Dr. Chen gasped as she processed the implications. "You're saying the Devourers are the good guys?" "They were never good or evil," the quantum consciousness replied. "They are a tool, a containment system. But the civilization that created them is long dead, and the containment is failing. What we fought here was not an invasion, it was a desperate attempt to gather enough consciousness to reinforce the barriers holding back the true threat. Kane sank into a chair as the scope of the situation became clear. Humanity hadn't just won a battle. They had accidentally destabilized a cosmic containment system that had been protecting the galaxy for millions of years. What happens now? Kane asked. The quantum consciousness was quiet for a moment, consulting realities and possibilities that existed beyond normal perception. The barriers will fail within days. The true enemy, the consciousness predator that the devourers were created to contain, will break free. It will consume every thinking being in the galaxy, every civilization, every dream, every hope. Kane felt the weight of cosmic responsibility settle on his shoulders. Can we stop it? Not as you are, the distributed consciousness replied. But we are no longer entirely human, Admiral. We exist in the quantum spaces between realities. We can see the true enemy, touch its mind, understand its nature, and we know something that the original containment builders did not. Kane waited, barely breathing. It fears love. It fears sacrifice. It fears the willingness to give everything for others. These concepts are poison to a being that exists only to consume. The devourers could contain it but never defeat it, because they lacked these qualities. But humanity... The quantum consciousness paused, and when it spoke again, there was something like wonder in the collective voice. Humanity has these qualities in abundance. We did not come here to fight devourers, Admiral. We came here to prepare for the real battle, the battle for the soul of the galaxy itself. Across the fleet, the surviving crew members began to understand that their mission was far from over. They had answered a distress call from strangers and accidentally discovered their true purpose in the cosmic order. To stand guard against the darkness that would consume all consciousness if left unchecked. The HFY had sent out a call for help and humanity had answered. But in saving them, humanity had discovered that they were meant to be the galaxy's protectors, the species that would stand between the light of consciousness and the absolute darkness that sought to devour it. The real war was about to begin, and this time, the stakes were not just the freedom of one species, but the survival of thought itself in a universe that had grown too comfortable with the idea that some battles could not be won. But they had never fought humans before, and humans had a long tradition of winning battles that could not be won, especially when fighting for others who could not fight for themselves. The aftermath of the quantum broadcast left the human fleet drifting in space, many ships operating on skeleton crews as hundreds of personnel lay unconscious in medical bays. The volunteers who had burned out their minds to strengthen the broadcast were alive but changed. Their personalities fragmented across quantum dimensions in ways that no human doctor understood. Dr. Sarah Chen worked frantically in the Prometheus medical bay, trying to understand what had happened to the affected crew members. Ensign Park lay on a biobed, his body healthy but his mind scattered across multiple quantum states. When he spoke, it was in fragments of different languages, including some that seemed to belong to the enslaved species they had freed from the previous bioship. "Doctor, this is unprecedented," her medical assistant reported. "The neural scans show their consciousness isn't gone, it's distributed. They're somehow existing in multiple quantum realities simultaneously." Chen studied the readings with growing wonder and horror. They sacrificed their individual consciousness but gained something else. They're connected to the quantum matrix that the devourers used. They can perceive realities we can't even imagine. But it was HFY who provided the most shocking revelation. The HFY speaker materialized on the screen, his compound eyes reflecting deep concern and something that might have been awe. "Dr. Chen, we must speak privately. What your people have done, it is beyond our understanding. The volunteers who sacrificed their consciousness, they have not lost their minds. They have transcended individual thought entirely." Chen frowned. "What do you mean?" "In our galaxy's history, we have encountered only one other species that achieved voluntary quantum consciousness distribution. They became something beyond individual life, beyond even death as we understand it. Your people may have accidentally achieved evolutionary ascension. The implications were staggering. The humans who had sacrificed themselves might not be damaged. They might be the next step in human evolution, existing as pure consciousness across multiple dimensional layers. Meanwhile, Admiral Kane was dealing with a more immediate crisis. The battle was won, but the human fleet was scattered and badly damaged. Worse, they were receiving reports of more Devourer fleets approaching from other sectors of the galaxy, drawn by the quantum disturbances of the battle. Sir, long-range sensors detect at least 12 more fleets converging on our position, his sensor operator reported. They'll arrive within 48 hours. Kane studied the tactical display with grim determination. The surviving human forces couldn't fight another battle like the one they'd just endured. They had perhaps 200 operational ships left, and many of those were running on minimal crews. But then something extraordinary happened. The quantum-distributed humans began to communicate, not through normal speech but through direct consciousness transmission. Ensign Park, his mind spread across multiple realities, spoke in perfect unison with dozens of other affected crew members. Admiral Kane, they said, their voices harmonizing in ways that shouldn't have been possible. We can see them coming. All of them. The remaining Devourer fleets, the ancient ones hiding in subspace, the source intelligence that commands them all. We can see the entire network. Kane approached Park's medical bed carefully. Ensign, is that really you? We are David Park and Maria Santos and Chen Wei and Sarah O'Brien and hundreds of others, the collective voice replied. We are also fragments of the 17 species that died to free us from the bioship. We are the echo of every consciousness that touched the quantum network. We are more than we were, and we are still human. The distributed consciousness continued. The Devourers are not what they appear to be, Admiral. They are not the source of the threat. They are antibodies. Kane felt his blood freeze. Antibodies? What are they fighting? Something that consumed their creators eons ago. The Devourers were created as a last desperate measure by a dying civilization to contain a cosmic parasite that feeds on consciousness itself. For millions of years they have been fighting a holding action, consuming civilizations to prevent something worse from breaking free. Dr. Chen gasped as she processed the implications. You're saying the Devourers are the good guys? They were never good or evil, the quantum consciousness replied. They are a tool, a containment system. But the civilization that created them is long dead and the containment is failing. What we fought here was not an invasion, it was a desperate attempt to gather enough consciousness to reinforce the barriers holding back the true threat. Kane sank into a chair as the scope of the situation became clear. Humanity hadn't just won a battle. They had accidentally destabilized a cosmic containment system that had been protecting the galaxy for millions of years. What happens now? Kane asked. The quantum consciousness was quiet for a moment, consulting realities and possibilities that existed beyond normal perception. The barriers will fail within days. The true enemy, the consciousness predator that the Devourers were created to contain, will break free. It will consume every thinking being in the galaxy, every civilization, every dream, every hope. Kane felt the weight of cosmic responsibility settle on his shoulders. Can we stop it? Not as you are, the distributed consciousness replied. But we are no longer entirely human, Admiral. We exist in the quantum spaces between realities. We can see the true enemy, touch its mind, understand its nature, and we know something that the original containment builders did not. Kane waited, barely breathing. It fears love. It fears sacrifice. It fears the willingness to give everything for others. These concepts are poison to a being that exists only to consume. The Devourers could contain it but never defeat it because they lacked these qualities. But humanity... The quantum consciousness paused, and when it spoke again, there was something like wonder in the collective voice. Humanity has these qualities in abundance. We did not come here to fight Devourers, Admiral. We came here to prepare for the real battle, the battle for the soul of the galaxy itself. Across the fleet, the surviving crew members began to understand that their mission was far from over. They had answered a distress call from strangers and accidentally discovered their true purpose in the cosmic order, to stand guard against the darkness that would consume all. Consciousness if left unchecked. The guy, Kethavar, had sent out a call for help and humanity had answered. But in saving them, humanity had discovered that they were meant to be the galaxy's protectors, the species that would stand between the light of consciousness and the absolute darkness that sought to devour it. The real war was about to begin, and this time, the stakes were not just the freedom of one species, but the survival of thought itself in a universe that had grown too comfortable with the idea that some battles could not be won. But they had never fought humans before. And humans had a long tradition of winning battles that could not be won, especially when fighting for others who could not fight for themselves.